Long time ago, the sun had not yet risen, and the sky above the village of Bawande was still covered in a quiet, ashen gray. Thin tendrils of smoke rose from the thatched roofs of the huts, blending into the morning mist like the breath of ancient spirits. In a small hut made of dry clay, Amara, a 13-year-old girl with bright eyes but a gaunt face, woke up early, sitting quietly beside a basket of dry millet. A harsh coughing sound came from the corner of the hut, startling her. Her younger brother, Kofi, only 6 years old, was curled up in a feverish spasm. His eyes were red, his lips cracked and dry. Their mother, Nia, had exhausted all her tears after many sleepless nights, carefully scraping together every drop of hot water to wash him. There was no medicine, no money, no hope. "We will take him to the healer," Nia whispered, trying to convince herself. But both of them knew. Their village had no hospital, and the nearest clinic was 3 days away, requiring either gold or camels, neither of which they had. Amara stood up, clutching the basket of millet to her chest, and left the hut. She walked through the dry, hot wind, passing cracked earthen houses where the elderly people bowed their heads in silence like ghosts. The market that day was quiet, with only a few people selling clay pots, roots, or a scrawny chicken. The young girl spread a cloth on the ground, arranging the millet into small piles, her voice soft as she whispered, "Millet, clean millet, just 2 coins each." As people walked by, few stopped. The sun was rising higher, and Amara's eyes stung from the wind and dust. She sold only 2 small handfuls, enough to trade for a bowl of thin porridge for her brother. She hugged her basket and walked toward the ancient baobab tree at the center of the village, where an old man with a silver beard often made porridge for the poor. "Grandfather Abba, do you have porridge today?" Amara asked urgently. Grandfather Abba looked up from his steaming pot, his eyes soft but filled with concern. "Will you trade millet?" Amara nodded and handed him the remainder of her millet. He scooped a bowl of thin porridge for her, slightly darkened by the smoke, but still warm. She took the bowl in both hands and sat on a nearby stone. Then she looked up at him and asked, "Grandfather Abba, do you know any way to help my brother get better? He's been feverish for 3 days. Mother says he won't make it." The old man paused for a moment, stirring the porridge slowly, then replied, "There are some herbs on the western mountain, but you can't go up there alone, and no one dares go there anymore. Other than that, your only choice is to take him to the nomads' clinic. It's far away. You would need gold or a camel." Amara lowered her head, the bowl of porridge trembling in her hands, but she tried to hold it carefully so it wouldn't spill. The sky seemed to quiet with her. When the sun reached its peak, Amara noticed a man standing a little ways off, wearing a long brown robe, his head wrapped in a white cloth, and leaning on a carved wooden staff. He didn't speak, didn't approach, just stood still, watching her. Amara looked away, her heart racing. There was something in his gaze that made her feel a cold chill. A moment later he walked over. His voice was low and raspy. "How much for a handful of millet?" "2 coins, sir," Amara replied, not looking up. He bought 3 handfuls, paid double the price, and then asked softly, "What's your name?" "Amara." He nodded and left without another word, but his footsteps seemed to leave a cold trail in the sand. That evening, the villagers gathered around the fire as they often did. Elder women and grandmothers, draped in brightly colored scarves, had come early to Amara's hut, bringing bowls of water, incense, and sacred twigs. They sat around the small fire inside the hut, hands clasped in prayer for Kofi, who was fighting for his life in the grip of a fever. They recited the old prayers in their native tongue, their voices soft as the wind, yet filled with sincerity. Amara sat beside them, her eyes red from crying, feeling as if all the hopes of the village were bound up in her little brother's fragile breath. The wind blew through the tattered cloths, carrying the smell of smoke and whispered worries. Grandfather Abba sat near the fire, nodding along as the women whispered among themselves, "Teme's daughter went missing last week, and the one from Nalo's house just married off to a stranger from the border. No one knows who he really is. A few years ago, there was another man like that, came with gifts, then took a girl. No one ever saw her again." Children were kept indoors, no longer running around the fire like they used to. The air was heavy with unspoken fears. Amara huddled closer to her mother, listening to the murmurs that fell like stones into her heart. In the flickering light of the fire, Amara unconsciously thought of her closest friend, Zaya. The two of them had run through the fields together, milked goats, and shared handfuls of roasted millet. But last year, when Zaya had just turned 11, her family married her off to the chief's son from a neighboring village, a rough man almost 20 years her senior. Since the day Zaya was taken away, Amara had not seen her friend. The rumors said Zaya was locked inside a house, no longer allowed to go outside, no longer singing, no longer smiling. Just thinking of it made Amara's chest tighten, as though a heavy stone had been dropped inside her. She clutched her knees and pressed her face against her mother's. And in her heart, a question that no one dared to ask echoed, "Will I end up like that?" Those stories no longer felt distant. They were getting closer. As the family sat around the fire, the sound of camel hooves approached. The door of the hut creaked open. It was the man from earlier, but this time he carried a leather pouch and a cloth bag that smelled of herbs. "I am Malik," he said slowly. "I have come with an offer." Amara shrank behind her mother. Malik set the pouch down on the mat. The smell of old gold and herbs filled the air. "If you agree to marry your daughter to me," he continued, his eyes never leaving Amara, "your son will live. I have medicine, and I can take him to the clinic, 3 days' journey away by camel. Your family will never go hungry again." The atmosphere in the hut grew heavy. Nia jumped to her feet. "No, she's just a child. You can't. Your son will not survive the next 3 nights. Malik interrupted, his voice low but heavy as stone. "The choice is yours, but time waits for no one." He left, leaving behind the pouch of gold and herbs on the mat. Outside, the desert wind howled like a horn calling souls. Amara sat motionless. Her brother's shallow breaths echoed through the silence. She looked at her mother, the woman who had protected her from everything, now crying in helpless despair. And for the first time, Amara understood. If she did not step forward, no one else would. She clenched the edge of her tattered shirt, her voice low but firm. "I will go." As the night grew deeper, Nia sat in the corner of the hut, her arms wrapped around her knees as if trying to hold herself together. The wind outside howled through the thin walls, blowing out part of the fire. The faint light flickered on her pale, stunned face. Memories surged like a fever. Nia had once been a child like Amara. She had sat in this very place, curled up beside her mother when a strange man arrived, bringing seeds, goats, and promises of a better life. She had been only 15. The family had nothing to eat. Her father had died young, and her mother, who could not read, who could not protest tradition, had nodded in agreement. Nia remembered her first night as the wife of a shepherd. The man was 3 times her age, crude, smelling of alcohol and sweat. He never called her by name, just it. She lost her childhood, the laughter, and only had barren fields and bruised hands to remember. 3 years later, when he died from a snake bite, Nia was freed from her duties. She returned to the village pregnant. Her first child, Amara, was all she had left. But now history was repeating itself, and what terrified her most was that she couldn't do any differently than her mother had. Amara's gaze tonight made Nia's heart ache. The child was growing just like she had, eyes full of suffering, shoulders bearing the weight of the family. But unlike Nia, Amara knew exactly where she was being pushed. She knew, and still she chose to step into the flames. It made Nia both proud and broken-hearted. Nia gently ran her fingers through Amara's messy hair, whispering to herself, "I should have protected you, but I am too weak. Forgive me, Amara." The dawn broke slowly over Bawande. The first light of day filtered through the bamboo cracks, casting a soft glow on Amara's face as she stood quietly in front of the hut. Her younger brother, Kofi, still wheezed in his restless sleep beside the empty bowl of porridge from the night before and the damp cloth their mother had used to wipe his forehead until she was exhausted. Malik returned just as the sun crested over the mountain range. Still wearing his brown robe, his white scarf, and moving silently as always. This time he didn't carry the pouch of gold. Instead, he led a black camel, its back loaded with 2 water sacks, a bundle of herbs, and a rolled-up cloth, enough for a 3-day journey. "I've prepared," he said softly, like a breath. "We must leave before the sun rises too high." Amara did not turn around. She simply spoke to her mother. "I will go. Take care of my brother, mother. I will return. I promise." Naya didn't respond. She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking lightly. All the words of protest had dried up with the tears from last night. The villagers stood by the dirt path, stepping aside as Amara followed Malik out of the village. No one said anything. Only their eyes, hesitant, pitying, or worse, indifferent. An old woman silently pulled a small charm from her scarf and pressed it into Amara's hand. "To protect you from evil." The dry, highland wind hit Amara's face as they began to climb the northern slope. The narrow trail twisted between thorn bushes and gray rocks. Occasionally, Malik stopped to let the camel rest, pouring water from a leather skin for Amara. He didn't speak much, he just watched. Amara sat beside a large rock as the red glow of sunset painted the distant valley. It was then that she finally dared to look directly at him. The orange light reflected in his deep, ancient eyes, eyes that seemed to have lived through centuries. "Why me?" Amara asked. Malik stared at her for a long moment. "Because you do not lower your head when you are afraid." She didn't understand, but she didn't ask more. Inside her, a growing emptiness began to spread, not because of fear, but because of uncertainty. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know who this man was. Was he a predator or a savior? She had heard so many rumors about old men who took children to perform rituals, to harvest organs, or lock them in deep caves as slaves. But there were also vague stories of good men who quietly did the right thing, only no one believed them. That night, they camped under a wind-sheltering cliff. Malik started a fire with flint and dry grass. He handed Amara a bundle of food, corn cakes and a few dried dates. She ate in silence, her eyes glancing over at the wooden staff he had placed beside him. Just as she was about to close her eyes to sleep, she heard his voice, low and distant, like the whispering wind. "You are not a sheep to be led. You are the one who carries the fire." Amara didn't respond, but somehow those words stayed with her, like a small seed planted in her heart. 3 days later, they reached the mountain's peak. Malik's home was not the tent she had imagined, but an old stone tower, rising high and isolated from the rocky ground like a finger pointing to the sky. It was built from large gray stone slabs with no windows on the ground floor, only a heavy wooden door carved with ancient patterns. Malik didn't use a key. He simply placed his hand on the door, pressing it gently. The door creaked open. "Come in." The air inside was cool and surprisingly clean. There was no musty smell, no buzzing of insects. Just a dense silence, like a place that had been waiting for someone for a very long time. Amara stepped inside, her feet touching the cold stone floor. The walls were smooth, with nothing hanging except a few shelves of books. A spiral staircase led to the upper floor. Malik led her to a small room with a wooden bed, crisp white sheets, a wicker chair, and a small table with a teapot. "This is your room. I won't enter unless you need me." He left immediately. No instructions, no locking of the door, no further questions. Amara stood still for a long time, not because she was afraid, but because she couldn't comprehend what was happening. She touched the bedspread, the edge of the table, the stone wall. Everything was clean, simple, but so silent. So silent that it made her heart beat louder than usual. No one touched her, no one gave orders, no one forced her, but no one welcomed her either. Only one question echoed endlessly in her mind. Why me? And what does he really want? The first days in the stone tower passed quietly, like smoke and mist. Malik didn't speak much. Every morning he would gently knock on Amara's door, leaving a small wooden tray with corn cakes, herbal tea, and dried fruits, then leave. No reminders, no questions, only a strange silence, as if this place did not belong to the world outside. At first, Amara had been cautious, but she gradually let go of her fear. Yet she never forgot her purpose, to observe. She paid attention to every detail, the way Malik moved, the rooms he never opened, and especially the third-floor door that was always locked with an old iron padlock. One evening, after dinner, she quietly ascended the stairs once Malik had gone to his room. The tower had 3 floors. The ground floor was a dining room and small library. The second floor contained bedrooms, and the third floor, the one room she had never been allowed to enter. On her way, she happened to pass by the library. It was a small room with low bookshelves, the yellow light of an oil lamp and dust covering the book covers. On a stone table, she found a dark leather notebook tied with twine. She sat down and gently opened it. Inside were yellowed pages, written in careful handwriting. It wasn't a record of medicines, nor a personal diary. It was a list of names, hundreds of them. Ebele, Soro village, 11 years old, forced to marry an Indian merchant, missing. Micah, Dantari village, 10 years old, successfully rescued, now studying in Kano. Zora, Tumbul village, 12 years old, sold, whereabouts unknown. Amara held her breath, her eyes scanning each line. This wasn't a list of students. This was a list of girls whose childhood had been stolen. She read a few more pages. Some names were crossed out in red, and some pages were blank with a brief note. Arrived too late. She heard a noise behind her. Startled, she turned around, but it was only the wind. The curtain fluttered slightly. Her heart pounded in her chest. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She got out of her room, walking barefoot along the cold stone hallway, carrying a small oil lamp. She wanted to know. She wanted to understand who this man really was. When she reached the door to the third floor, something strange happened. The lock was open. No one had touched it. The door was merely ajar. She gently pushed it open. A strange scent wafted out, wood, old paper, and something faintly like dried flowers. Inside was a large room, dimly lit by a hanging lantern. On the walls were dozens, hundreds of hand-drawn portraits of girls, some smiling, some bewildered, some with eyes that still held the terror of fear. Under each drawing was a name and a year. In the corner of the room was a large wooden chest. Amara walked over and opened it. Inside were letters, handwritten, neatly folded, some still in envelopes. Mr. Malik, thanks to you, I survived. Now I live with a kind family by the river, and they teach me how to dye fabrics and weave baskets. I have a new name here, but I still remember my old name, and I remember you. Amara sat in the middle of the third-floor room, her hands trembling as she flipped through the old papers. The ink had faded with time. The handwriting was scrawled but sincere, as if they were blowing warmth from a distant past. Every sentence carried life, not the kind of life that is loud, but a life reborn from brokenness, like a seed sprouting after a fire. I no longer get beaten. Now I have my own mat. The woman here taught me how to make medicine from leaves. She says I can heal others. Do you remember the wooden knife you carved for me? I still keep it. Every time I look at it, I remember you telling me, "Don't let anyone steal the light in your eyes." Amara's finger paused on the rough piece of paper. The light from the oil lamp illuminated her face, making her wide eyes stand out, as though she had just seen something she had never seen before. Something shifted inside her, from deep in her heart, the place where a child had once known nothing but hunger, illness, silence, and bowing her head. Now a strange sound echoed, the sound of awareness. She suddenly realized, I am not the only one chosen. I am not the only victim. But maybe, this time, I am the only one with enough time to do something. Amara sank to the floor, holding the letters in her hands, tears falling before she even realized it. These were the girls who had once been like her, pushed into the dark, and someone had brought them back to the light, not with money, but with quiet sacrifice. It was the moment when a child began to grow up. A breath sounded behind her. She jolted and turned around. Malik was standing there, not angry, not surprised, only his gaze, like he had known she would find this. Now you know, he said, his voice deep and steady like ancient stone. You are the first I've married. Not because of desire, but because of the law. In many places, only in the name of wife can a child be taken without being stopped. Without it, I would be a kidnapper. Amara was speechless. She looked at the drawings again, the children, the lives. Why did you do it? She asked. Malik didn't answer immediately. He walked over, sitting down on the wooden chair near the window. The wind blew through the curtains gently, like a sigh. Because no one else does, he said. Every time I read about a girl being forced into marriage, being sold, and no one cares, I can't sleep. I've lived long enough to know. Sometimes, quietly saving one child is better than waiting for the whole world to speak up. He looked straight at her. Now it's your turn. I won't make you do anything. But I believe you are not an ordinary spark. Amara said nothing, but inside her, something was smoldering. That night, Amara didn't sleep. She sat in her room, looking at the notebook that Malik had given her on the first day. Now she was finally ready to open it. The first page was blank. She wrote one line, "My name is Amara. I am not a wife. I am not a daughter. I am the one entrusted with a secret, and from now on I will listen to it." Then she continued writing, about Bawande, about Kofi, about Zaya, about the night by the fire, about the faint breaths of children no one listens to. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door. The oil lamp flickered gently, but she was no longer afraid. Only Malik's words returned to her, like the beat of a heart. "You are the one who carries the fire." That morning began like any other day in the stone tower. Amara woke up as the early sunlight streamed through the high window, gently touching the edge of the white blanket. On the small table, the familiar wooden tray had already been placed. Corn cakes, a date, and a pot of cornflower tea. But this time there was no knock on the door, no soft greeting from Malik. Amara waited. A long while. Silence. She threw on her rough cloak and stepped into the stone corridor. The early morning wind blew through the archways, carrying the sounds of unfamiliar birds and the scent of old wood. The tower was as still as usual, yet something felt off. She tried the study. Empty. She called softly, "Malik?" No answer, just the echo of her own voice. With a cold, instinctive chill, Amara descended the spiral staircase to the lower floor, where, since arriving, she had never seen him frequent. The door to his bedroom was ajar. She pushed it open gently. Inside, Malik lay on his simple wooden cot. The blanket covered him to his chest. His face was serene, eyes half closed as if he were dreaming. His hand rested on his chest, beneath which lay a small leather notebook, open halfway. On the page was the final line, still wet with ink. "Now I can rest, for the flame has found its keeper." Amara did not scream. She did not cry. She just stood there, her breath breaking in her chest. Somehow, her heart understood that this was inevitable. He had always known his time was running short, and because of that, he had rushed to find her. The next day, a man arrived on horseback from the village below. He was Father Eli, the priest from the chapel in the village, an old friend of Malik's. Alongside him were two village chiefs, carrying a wooden box and ceremonial items. The three men entered the tower, preparing for a farewell ceremony. Father Eli looked at Amara with understanding in his eyes. "Malik left everything to you," he said softly, "but not just his belongings. He left you a mission." He opened the box and took out a carefully sealed scroll of parchment. On it were Malik's written words, stating that Amara was the only one entrusted with everything he owned. And she was not only the heir to his material wealth, but also the one who must preserve and continue the work he had started. Father Eli and the two chiefs confirmed it, an official inheritance ritual. He handed Amara a piece of cloth, dyed indigo, embroidered with a flame symbol, an emblem of the responsibility she was now bound to carry. "This flame is not to be extinguished. It must be passed on," Father Eli said. Amara stood still, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, not because she wanted it, but because Malik had entrusted her with it. 3 years had passed since Amara left Bawande to study under the guidance of Pastor Eli and the priests in the small chapel of the village. That time was not just for learning knowledge, but also for Amara to find herself again, to turn the scars of her past into strength and determination for the future. She returned to the village, but she was no longer the poor girl who sold millet. Now Amara was a 16-year-old young woman, beautiful, confident, and far more mature than the day she left. Her hair was long and shiny, neatly tied, her face radiant, and her eyes sparkling with understanding and steadfast faith. She carried the flame that Malik had entrusted to her, ready to change not just her own life, but the fate of the entire village. When Amara walked into the village, the first people who saw her couldn't believe their eyes. They looked at her in amazement, hardly recognizing who she was. But gradually, whispers began to spread through the air. "Is that Amara? That girl who used to sell millet? She looks so different. She's beautiful and has changed so much." She didn't rush forward. She simply walked quietly, aware of the eyes that followed her, eyes full of doubt, curiosity, and a little admiration. The older women in the village stood by their doorways, their eyes full of curiosity. The The children stopped playing and looked at her in surprise. When Amara reached her home, her mother, Nia, and her brother Kofi were tending to the fire. The familiar smell of smoke filled the air, and Amara felt a deep sense of emotion. Her mother still looked the same, with a slightly weathered face, but her eyes carried a great deal of worry. As Amara walked closer, her mother looked up, her eyes widening, then falling into silence. "Amara?" Nia choked, unable to believe her eyes. She stood up, her hands trembling, and rushed to embrace her daughter. Amara simply smiled and hugged her mother tightly. She didn't need to say anything. The embrace spoke everything that Nia couldn't express in words. She had returned, and now she was no longer just the beloved girl, but a grown woman, someone who could change everything. Kofi, seeing his sister for the first time after so many days of her absence, looked at her with a face full of astonishment. He had recovered from the long illness, now a healthy and lively boy, always mentioning his sister's name. Joy and happiness flooded his heart, and he knew that his sister was not only someone he loved, but now a hero he would always admire. The next morning, after speaking to several people in the village, Amara stood in the middle of the village square, where everyone had gathered to listen to her speak. Beside her was Pastor Eli, who had been with her during the years of learning about love, God, and justice. Alongside them stood Chief Ayo, who had witnessed her transformation and now stood by to support her. Amara held an old Bible that Pastor Eli had given her, then stepped forward. She looked at the crowd, her gaze full of determination and gentleness. She began, "Brothers and sisters in Bawande, today we stand before each other not only to hear the words of God, but to understand that we can change our lives, starting from within." She paused for a moment, then read a passage from the Bible that she felt was perfect for this moment. "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Her voice rang out, strong yet full of compassion. The crowd fell silent, listening to each word she spoke. God has taught us that if we love another, we love Him. Therefore, we cannot live only for ourselves. We must help one another, love one another, and change our lives starting today. We will not let any more children be sold. We will rebuild this village from the smallest actions, from kindness, from love, and from unity. When she finished speaking, the atmosphere around them seemed to pause for a moment. Then, people began to clap, not only for the words she had spoken, but because they truly believed in her. They believed that, under Amara's leadership, Bawande could change. Amara had not only returned as an heir, she had returned with responsibility and a mission. And now, she was not just a young woman, but a leader, someone who ignited the flame of hope for the entire village. With the words of God, with compassion, and with love, Amara began to write a new chapter for Bawande, where every villager could stand up and change their own fate. As time passed, Amara not only changed herself, but became a symbol of change for an entire community. She gradually became a leader, a bearer of hope, someone who fought for justice and love. The small schools Amara started building in Bawande spread to neighboring villages. Children not only learned how to read, but also learned about their rights, about what they deserved in this life. Women no longer had to bow their heads in silence. They stood together, protecting the children and working with Amara to create a brighter future. In the years that followed, Amara began to write. She wrote about the stories of the children, about the tragedies they faced, about the battle to protect children's rights, about the promises she had made and the lessons she had learned along her journey. She wrote not only to record the pain and hope, but also to inspire others to take action. She didn't just protect, she inspired those who needed her. Amara's flame didn't only light up Bawande, but extended far beyond the boundaries she once knew, to help save children, to change fates, and to protect the basic rights of humans. She was not only Malik's heir, not only the bearer of the flame. Amara had become the leader, the one who guided others through the darkness, opening a new path, a path of love and compassion. And she knew her journey would never end. She went wherever she was needed, lighting flames of hope, and continued to protect children on the long, unceasing road. Dear friends, If Amara's journey of hope and transformation has inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of change and courage. Together, we can light the way for a brighter future. Bye.